Hey everyone, welcome to GK Study English. Get ready to explore a world of knowledge, improve your knowledge, and have a great time while you're at it. Stick around as we dive into interesting topics and make learning a whole lot of fun. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss out on our engaging videos. Let's get started on this exciting journey together. On 3rd May 1799, something really important happened. There was a big wall around the Seringapatam fort. Historian S.R. Lushington wrote in his book Life of Haras the British army wanted to get inside, so they used big cannons to make a hole in the wall. That even though the hole wasn't very big, General George Harris decided to send his soldiers through it. He didn't have much choice because they were running out of food and his soldiers were really hungry. Later, Harris admitted to Captain Multan that he was so weak from hunger and tiredness that if someone pushed him lightly, he would fall down from his tent. On the night of 3rd May, around 5,000 soldiers, including about 3,000 British soldiers, hid in trenches to keep Tipu Sultan's soldiers from finding out their plans. When it was almost time for the attack, Mir Sadiq, who had betrayed Tipu Sultan, called Tipu's soldiers away, pretending to give them privacy. Another historian, Mir Hussain Ali Khan Kirmani, wrote in his book History of Tipu Sultan based on Colonel Mark Wilkes' accounts. Kirmani says that Tipu's commander Nadim had raised concerns about pay, so the soldiers near the hole in the fortress were pulled back. When the British attacked, one of Tipu's loyal commanders, Syed Ghaffar, was killed by a British cannonball. Kirmani mentions that as soon as Ghaffar died, the traitorous soldiers inside the fortress began waving white cloths to signal the British. This was planned beforehand, and the British knew that when they saw this signal, they should start the attack on the fortress. When they got the signal, the British soldiers started moving towards the river, which was only around 100 yards away from the fortress. As soon as they saw the signal, the British soldiers began moving toward the river, which was about 280 yards wide. Some parts of the river were shallow, only ankle deep, while in other parts, the water went up to their waists. The famous historian Colonel Mark Wilkes writes that Tipu Sultan was smaller in height than his father Hyder Ali. His skin was dark, he had large eyes, wore simple and lightweight clothing, and hoped to do things even more remarkable than his marvelly soldiers. He was often seen riding a horse, and he held a great regard for artillery. He had skill in using it, but he didn't prefer to ride in a palanquin. The historian Colonel Mark Wilkes said that Tipu Sultan was shorter than his father Hyder Ali. Tipu had dark skin, big eyes, and he wore simple clothes that weren't heavy. He wanted to do impressive things even more than his soldiers. People often saw him riding a horse, and he really liked big cannons. He was good at using them, but he didn't like riding in a special carriage called a palanquin. You can learn a bit about Tipu Sultan's personality from a book called An Account of Tipu Sultan's Court, which is kept in the British Library. His assistant, Muhammad Qasim, gave this book to a British historian after Tipu Sultan passed away. Tipu Sultan was not very tall, he had a wide forehead, raised eyebrows, and a slim waist. He had a small moustache and a neatly trimmed beard. In the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, there's a statue of him. He's wearing a green turban with a special decoration made of rubies and pearls. He's also wearing a green outfit with a tiger design on his waistband and a belt on his side with a sword hanging from it. On 14 February 1799, about 21,000 soldiers led by General George Harris started marching from Vellore to Mysore. On 20th March, near Amber, a group of around 16,000 soldiers joined them, under the leadership of Colonel Wellesley. Among these soldiers, there was a group of 6,420 led by General Stuart near Kannur. Together, they attacked Seringhapattam against Tipu Sultan. Famous historian James Mill wrote in his book The History of British India that Tipu Sultan was the same ruler whose British had taken control of half of his kingdom 6 years earlier. He had a little over 1 crore rupees as annual revenue from the remaining. At that time, the total revenue collected by the British in India was £9 million, which is around 90 million rupees. Bit by bit, they surrounded the Seringhapattam fortress. Then, on 3rd May 1799, they used cannons to make a hole in its walls. Another historian, S.R. Lushington, wrote in his book Life of Harras that even though the hole wasn't very big, General George Harris decided to send his soldiers through it. He didn't have much choice because they were running out of food and his soldiers were really hungry. Later, Harris admitted to Captain Malkan that he was so weak from hunger and tiredness that if someone pushed him lightly, he would fall down from his tent. On the night of 3rd May, around 5,000 soldiers, including about 3,000 British soldiers, hid in trenches to keep Tipu Sultan's soldiers from finding out their plans. When it was almost time for the attack, Mir Sadiq, who had betrayed Tipu Sultan, called Tipu's soldiers away, pretending to give them privacy. Another historian, Mir Hussain Ali Khan Kirmani, wrote in his book History of Tipu Sultan based on Colonel Mark Wilkes' accounts. Kirmani says that Tipu's commander Nadim had raised concerns about pay, so the soldiers near the hole in the fortress were pulled back. When the British attacked, one of Tipu's loyal commanders, Syed Ghaffar, was killed by a British cannonball. Kirmani mentions that as soon as Ghaffar died, the traitorous soldiers inside the fortress began waving white cloths to signal the British. This was planned beforehand, and the British knew that when they saw this signal, they should start the attack on the fortress. When they got the signal, the British soldiers started moving towards the river, which was only around 100 yards away from the fortress. As soon as they saw the signal, the British soldiers began moving toward the river, which was about 280 yards wide. Some parts of the river were shallow, only ankle deep, while in other parts, the water went up to their waists. Major Alexander Allen wrote in his book an account of the campaign in Mysore. Even though the British soldiers could have easily used their cannons to attack the defenders from the fortress, some soldiers managed to get out of the trenches in just 7 minutes. They put up the British flag on the opening they had made to escape the old cannons in the fort. Once they captured the opening, British soldiers split into 2 groups and moved towards the inner part of the fortress. Tipu Sultan's soldiers in front of them put up a strong fight. In the fight, the leader of the group, Colonel Dunlap, got a serious arm injury from a sword. After that, Tipu's soldiers prevented the British soldiers from moving forward as they reached the group. This happened because Tipu Sultan himself jumped into the fight to boost his soldiers' courage. Lieutenant Farquhar Nelly took over after Dunlap got hurt, but he also got killed very quickly. On the morning of 4th May, Tipu Sultan rode his horse and went to check the opening in the fortress's wall. He gave orders for its repair. After that, he returned to the palace and started having dinner. While he was eating, he received news that his close commander Syed Ghaffar had died. Ghaffar had been watching the western side of the fortress for security. Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Beatson wrote in his book A View of the Origin and Conduct of the War with Tipu Sultan. He mentioned that as soon as he heard news about Tipu, he left his meal, washed his hands, and quickly got on his horse. He went to the place where a hole had been made in the fortress wall. But even before he got there, the British soldiers had already put up their flag and were moving into different parts of the fortress. Beatson also mentioned that during the battle, Tipu mostly fought on foot like regular soldiers. But when his soldiers started losing hope, Tipu got on his horse to try and boost their courage. Mark Wilkes wrote that Tipu could have escaped the battle if he wanted to. At that time, his commander Meet Nadim was standing on the roof of the fortress gate. But Tipu didn't pay attention to his commander. By then, Tipu had already been injured. When Tipu moved towards the inner gate of the fortress, he was hit by a bullet on his left chest, and his horse was also shot. Tipu's comrades tried to put him on a palanquin to carry him away from the battlefield, but they couldn't because many soldiers were already injured. Major Alexander Allen wrote that at that time, his bodyguard Raza Khan suggested to Tipu that he should introduce himself to the British to avoid being captured. But Tipu didn't listen to this suggestion. Instead of becoming a prisoner of the British, he chose to die. Describing the final moments of Tipu Sultan, Beatson writes that when some British soldiers entered the inner gate of the fortress, one of them tried to take Tipu's sword belt. Tipu was bleeding a lot and was almost unconscious due to the blood loss. He managed to hit that soldier with his sword, and then he attacked another British officer. At that moment, an unknown British soldier attacked Tipu with a sword. He wanted to get Tipu's gem-studded sword from China. Tipu didn't know who he had hit with his sword. The British didn't know that Tipu Sultan had died. There, in the light of torches, they saw Tipu Sultan's palanquin with his body beneath. Later, Major Alexander Allen wrote, when Tipu's lifeless body was brought before us, his eyes were open. His body was still warm, and for a moment, Colonel Velajali and I thought he might still be alive. But when we checked his pulse and heart, he had 4 wounds on his body, 3 on his chest, and 1 on his forehead. A bullet had entered his right ear and got stuck in his head. He was wearing a well-made white outfit with silk around the waist. He wasn't wearing a turban on his head, and it seemed like he had fallen in the chaos of battle. He had no jewelry on, except for a wristband, which was a silver talisman with writings in Arabic and Persian. General Beard ordered his body to be placed in the palanquin and informed the court that Tipu Sultan was no longer. General Beard ordered his body to be placed in the palanquin and informed the court that Tipu Sultan was no longer alive. His body was kept in the court overnight and the next evening. Tipu Sultan's funeral procession started from the royal palace. His personal attendants carried his body, and 4 British campagnans also participated. Documents in the National Library of Scotland mention that behind Tipu's body, Prince Abdul Khalik walked. Then came the main court officials. People lined the streets, paying their respects as the procession passed. Many were crying. Tipu's body was placed near the tomb of Hyder Ali in Lal Bagh. After the burial, around 5,000 rupees were distributed among those who were part of Tipu Sultan's funeral. Beatson also wrote that as night fell, the atmosphere turned somber, and during a storm with dark clouds, 2 British officers were killed, and many soldiers were injured. After Tipu's death, the British soldiers looted Srirangpatna extensively. However, they left untouched Tipu's throne made of silver and gold, with a gold and silver tiger seat, along with precious gem-studded necklaces, swords, valuable gemstones, precious textiles, and jewels. The valuable library of Tipu, containing over 2,000 books in Arabic, Farsi, Urdu, and Hindi, covering history, science, and medicine, remains safe. There were over 20,000 books and a collection of scientific tools. The British army found more than 100 pieces of gold, and they gave Tipu's sword to Wellesley. Major Alexander Allen wrote in his book an account of the campaign in Mysore that Harris also gave another sword of Tipu to Beard. And the lion head from Tipu's throne was sent to Wilkes' treasury as a keepsake. After Tipu's fall, there was no one left to challenge the British except an English journalist, Peter Osborne, who wrote in his book Rise and Progress of British Power in India, after Tipu's defeat. The entire kingdom had fallen to us.